For years, she lived under the shadow of a legend. The granddaughter of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, Riley Keough grew up surrounded by fame, fortune, and tragedy. But behind the lights, the red carpets, and the carefully built image of grace and strength, Riley carried a truth the world could only suspect. At 36, she finally spoke out, admitting something that left even her closest fans stunned, a truth that connected generations of pain, loss, and resilience within one of America's most famous families. This is the story of Riley Keough, not the celebrity, not the Hollywood starlet, but the woman who spent her life balancing between the weight of a royal name and the desperate need to find her own identity. You're watching Hollywood Vault 8 AM, and this is the revelation we all felt was coming. Riley Keough's story begins in the midst of chaos, fame, and heartbreak. Born Danielle Riley Keough in 1989, she was the daughter of Lisa Marie Presley and musician Danny Keough. Her very birth came with the burden of expectation. She was Elvis Presley's first grandchild, a living link to music royalty. The world looked at her as if destiny had already been written. Yet behind that smile was a girl who grew up watching her mother struggle with the same curse that haunted the Presley family, the curse of fame. Lisa Marie tried to shield Riley from the spotlight, but when you're part of a dynasty like this, the cameras always find you. Riley once described her childhood as beautifully chaotic. She saw mansions, luxury, and red carpets, but she also saw divorce, addiction, and loss far too early. She learned what it means to smile for the cameras while crying in silence. As she grew older, Riley tried to stay invisible in a world that demanded her to shine. She didn't want to be Elvis's granddaughter, she wanted to be herself. But how do you escape the most famous last name in music history? Hollywood came calling, and at first, she resisted. Acting wasn't her dream, it was her rebellion. Yet when she finally stepped in front of a camera, everything changed. Her debut in The Runaways, and later her performance in Magic Mike, proved she wasn't riding on a last name, she was building her own path. Directors began to notice her quiet power, her emotional depth, and her ability to carry pain through her eyes. She wasn't just another celebrity kid, she was an artist haunted by real experiences. But even as her career took off, the ghosts of Graceland never left her. In interviews, Riley often hinted at the pressure that came with her bloodline. She said, "You grow up realizing that people expect you to be something before you even know who you are." The Presley name was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it opened doors. On the other, it trapped her inside a legacy too heavy to bear. Every time she smiled on screen, there was a silent scream underneath. The voice of someone asking, "When will I just be Riley?" Hollywood embraced her beauty, but few understood her pain. The tabloids called her the girl with Elvis's eyes, but inside, she felt like a stranger to her own reflection. Her mother's struggles with addiction, her father's quiet distance, and her family's history of heartbreak began to carve deep emotional lines in her soul. She carried them into every performance, making her roles in films like American Honey and The Girlfriend Experience feel raw and hauntingly real. But the real turning point came when tragedy struck again. In 2020, Riley lost her younger brother, Benjamin Keough, the one person who truly understood her pain. Benjamin's death shattered her completely. The resemblance between Benjamin and their grandfather, Elvis, had always been striking, almost like the past had been reborn in him. When he was gone, it felt like the family's heart stopped beating once more. Riley's public silence during that time said everything. Behind the cameras, she was grieving not only her brother but the generations of loss her family had endured. Elvis died young. Lisa Marie struggled through fame and heartbreak. And now Benjamin, another Presley gone too soon. It was as if the cycle refused to break. Years later, when Riley spoke about that period, her words trembled with both pain and truth. "I felt like I was walking through fire," she said. "I didn't know who I was without my family, without the people I loved." The world saw a calm, graceful woman accepting awards and walking red carpets, but behind the scenes, she was fighting an emotional battle just to keep going. She turned to acting not as a career, but as therapy, each role helping her process grief she couldn't put into words. It was in those silent moments between takes, those lonely nights after shooting, that Riley began to rediscover herself. not as a Presley, not as a Hollywood actress, but as a woman trying to survive. Then, in early 2023, another heartbreak shook her world, the sudden death of her mother, Lisa Marie Presley. The world mourned, but for Riley, the pain was indescribable. In an instant, she became the last torchbearer of Elvis's bloodline, the heir to Graceland, the Presley estate, and all the weight that came with it. Reporters focused on the legal battles over the estate, but Riley's silence during that period spoke volumes. What the world didn't see was a daughter mourning her mother while trying to protect the legacy of a family that had given everything to the world and received so much pain in return. When she finally broke her silence, her words were soft yet powerful. "I want to protect my mother's legacy with love, not with headlines." And then came the confession, the one that caught everyone's attention. At 36, Riley Keough finally admitted what so many had suspected but never dared to say aloud. That living in the shadow of Elvis Presley had shaped every part of her life, her pain, her ambition, and even her silence. She confessed that for years, she felt like she was performing a version of herself, one that the world wanted to see, not the one she truly was. She admitted that she had spent much of her life running from her last name, only to realize she could never truly escape it. "I used to think the Presley name was a cage," she said. "Now I understand it's a legacy of love and loss, and it's up to me to give it meaning." Her honesty touched millions. It wasn't a scandal or a secret affair, it was something much deeper. Riley's confession revealed the cost of fame, the loneliness behind a famous last name, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild yourself from ashes. She spoke about motherhood, grief, and identity, about finding peace not in denying her heritage but in accepting it. "I've spent my life trying to prove I'm more than Elvis's granddaughter," she said, "but now I realize, being his granddaughter doesn't define me, it reminds me where I come from." The world saw a new Riley, not the rebel, not the actress, but the woman who had finally embraced her truth. Since then, Riley has continued to rise in Hollywood, not as an heir to fame but as an artist of her own making. Her work on Daisy Jones and the Six earned her critical acclaim, and fans finally began to see her as Riley Keough, the actress, the director, the storyteller. But beneath the awards and applause, her heart remains tied to the family that shaped her. She visits Graceland not as a tourist, but as a granddaughter trying to keep the flame alive. Each year, as the fans gather to remember Elvis, Riley stands quietly among them. No cameras, no statements, just a woman honoring the man whose shadow once consumed her life but whose spirit now gives her strength. Riley Keough's journey is a mirror of the American dream, beautiful on the outside, painful underneath. It's a story of fame, loss, and rediscovery. A reminder that behind every glamorous headline is a human being fighting invisible battles. At 36, Riley Keough has finally done what no one in her family could. She's found peace in being herself, not the king's granddaughter, not the Hollywood star, just Riley. And maybe that's what we all suspected deep down, that behind the Presley name was a woman strong enough to carry it with grace, love, and truth. And as her story continues, one thing is certain: Riley Keough is no longer living in anyone's shadow. She's become the light her family always needed. The living proof that even after generations of pain, the Presley legacy can still shine, not through music or fame, but through healing. You've been watching Hollywood Vault 8 AM, where we uncover the real stories behind the stars. If Riley's story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths that go beyond the headlines.